Let's talk about membranes. Membranes are going to be usually the lining of many of our structures, either inside or outside. A vast majority of our structures are lined by epithelial membranes, your body cavities, tracts, external surface of the body itself. So, what defines an epithelial membrane? An epithelial membrane is a continuous multicellular sheet composed of at least two primary tissue types. It is an epithelium bound to an underlying layer of fibrous connective tissue. When we get into our integumentary system, which is in two audios, we'll talk about that in far more detail. All right, epithelial membranes come in three types: cutaneous, mucous, and serous. Cutaneous, that's your skin. It's an organ system consisting of keratinized, remember keratin is a protein, so keratin protein filled squamous epithelium, known as the epidermis, that is firmly attached to a thick layer of dense irregular connective tissue known as the dermis. Unlike every other epithelial membrane, it is exposed to the air routinely, regularly, and is a dry membrane, unless you're sweating. Mucous membranes, otherwise known as mucosa, these are going to typically be found as linings, especially if said area is exposed to the external environment. So where do we find these? Lining your digestive tract, starting with your mouth, all the way down the pharynx, the esophagus, and the stomach to the small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus. All of that's lined with mucosa. Respiratory, starting with your nose to the pharynx, to the trachea, to the bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli. Urinary, not so much the kidneys, but the urethra and bladder. Reproductive tracts, specifically the feminine reproductive tracts, the vaginal canal, the urethra, not the urethra, uterus, wrong you, the fallopian tubes, those are all lined with mucous membranes. These are wet membranes that are bathed in their own secretions, or in the case of the urinary tract, they're bathed in urine. So, what's unique about mucosa membranes? Mucosa membranes have absorptive, secretory, and protective functions. Their mucus itself is going to be secreted by goblet cells or multicellular mucus glands, or both. Why do we secrete mucus? Mucus is going to be involved in trapping foreign particles, including but not limited to bacteria, and or providing lubrication. The presence of mucus in and of itself does not define a mucous membrane. For instance, the mucous membranes of the urinary tract, you don't typically find mucus, but they are considered a mucous membrane. Cells modified for absorption are going to be found in our small intestine. We'll talk about them with the digestive tract. And cells modified for protection are present mainly at those positions of the tracts that are closest to the exterior. So those that are going to be involved more in protection are typically going to be found in more like the nasal cavity or the oral cavity, close to the exits. Serous membrane, otherwise known as serosa. This is a moist membrane found in closed ventral body cavities. The ventral, remember, those are your anterior body cavities that are not open to the exterior. So this is going to be more on the outside of the stomach. This is going to be the outside of the small intestine. This is going to be more of with the spleen or the liver or the kidneys. So they'll line the insides of the peritoneal, pleural, and pericardial cavities and the outer surfaces of the viscera. Viscera is another term for the organs found in your abdomen. This is going to be a simple squamous epithelial layer upon a thin layer of that areolar connective tissue, and is going to secrete a thin, watery fluid that arises from blood. This fluid is known as serous fluid, and it's a lubricant. It's an efficient means of lubricating cavity walls and organs to reduce friction. Why do we want to reduce friction? Friction generates heat. Friction creates inflammation. All right. Now, when we are referring to the lining portion, it is a double-layered membrane at this point, and the outer layer is referred to as the parietal layer, and the inner layer is referred to as the visceral layer. So when it's lining the lungs, it has a parietal pleura layer and a visceral pleura layer. If it's lining the heart, the outside of the heart, it has a parietal pericardial layer and a visceral pericardial layer. And then if it's lining the abdomen, we have a parietal peritoneal layer and a visceral peritoneal layer.